You know that feeling when you pull up to the pump, look up at those digital numbers taking away, and wonder how on earth they arrived at that final price tag? Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to dive right into this explainer and unpack the fascinating, totally layered world of petrol pricing in India. We're going to uncover exactly where your hard-earned money goes every time you fill up your tank. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with a fuel price mystery. Then we're peeling back the price tag, looking at the state VAT variable, comparing central versus state taxes, touching on the big GST debate, and finally, looking beyond taxes at the global factors. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the fuel price mystery. So why does petrol cost more depending on where you park? It's honestly a bit of a geographical price lottery, and the answer goes way beyond just the global price of crude oil. You can literally drive a few kilometers, cross an invisible state line, and boom, suddenly the fuel power in your car jumps up or down in price. What is actually happening behind the scenes to cause that? To put this into perspective, let's look at some numbers from May 2026. Down in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, a liter of petrol sits at about 82 rupees and 46 paise. But take that exact same liter of fuel over to Andhra Pradesh, and you're paying nearly 109 rupees. We are talking about an over 25 rupee difference for the exact same product. This massive gap right here, this is our central mystery. It's exactly why we're all constantly Googling the latest tax rates before crossing state borders. Let's figure out why this happens in part two. Peeling the price tag. Think of a liter of petrol like a layered cake. Moving from the refinery to your local retail outlet, each specific step systematically adds a calculated cost. First, you've got the base fuel price. That's the actual literal cost of the refined oil. Then, freight charges to physically move that liquid across the country. Next comes the dealer commission, because hey, your local pump needs to keep the lights on, right? And finally, the heavy hitters, central excise duty and state VAT. This is the exact journey every single drop of fuel takes before it hits your tank. Which brings us right to part three, the state VAT variable. This is where things get really interesting. Most states charge VAT as an ad valorem tax. It's just a fancy term that means it's a percentage rather than a flat fee. Because of this, you end up paying a tax on top of other taxes. The state isn't just taxing the base oil, they're taxing the base oil, plus the transport cost, plus the dealer's cut, and yep, even the central government's tax. It creates this massive snowball effect that inflates the price super rapidly. And here's exactly where that geographical disparity happens. Telangana, for instance, levies one of the highest VAT rates at around 35.2%. But then you look at places like Tamil Nadu, and they use a lower 13% rate mixed with a fixed amount. Because every state has its own unique revenue needs and infrastructure goals to hit, they essentially have complete freedom to write their own tax rules for petrol. And that single policy difference is why the fuel map of India looks like a crazy patchwork quilt. Let's break this dynamic down further in part four, central v state taxes. To really wrap our heads around the receipt, we've got to look impartially at how the center and the states tax your fuel totally differently. Think of the central tax as this sturdy, immovable block. No matter what the global oil market is doing, the central excise duty is a fixed rupee amount. But the state VAT, since it's a percentage, it acts like an inflating balloon. If global oil prices shoot up, the state's tax collection automatically inflates right along with it. And crucially, all that state revenue stays entirely within state borders. Now, the center can pull economic levers to control inflation, like they did in March 2026, slashing the special additional excise duty significantly from 13 down to 3 rupees per liter to give us all some relief at the pump. But because states control their own independent VIT, a central cut doesn't automatically guarantee an equally massive drop in your final bill. It all depends on whether the state decides to adjust its own percentage or keep it right where it is. All of this naturally leads us to part five, the GST debate. So you might be wondering, why not just put petrol under GST and make it uniform? Well, here is the crucial point. Petroleum taxes account for a staggering 25 to 30% of total tax revenue for several states. Just let that sink in for a second. Over a quarter of the money some states use to build highways, run welfare schemes, and pay for public infrastructure comes directly from taxing petrol and diesel. It is quite literally the lifeblood of their budgets.
Transitioning to GST could absolutely change the game for us consumers. If petrol entered the GST system, that whole cascading tax-on-tax snowball we talked about would vanish. Experts estimate pump prices could plummet by 15 to 25 rupees. We'd all celebrate for sure. But state governments would suddenly find a massive gaping hole in their ability to fund local development because they'd lose independent control over their most vital revenue stream. So you can see why it's a classic, incredibly tricky economic tug of war.
Before we wrap up, we have to rapidly zoom out for Part 6, Beyond Taxes, Global Factors. Domestic taxes are only part of the story, right? We have to remember that India imports over 85% of its crude oil. We just don't produce enough natively. This means we're heavily reliant on buying it in US dollars. So when geopolitical supply disruptions drove Brent crude up near $104 a barrel in May 2026, and the Indian rupee simultaneously weakened to 95.25 against the dollar, well, that applied immense baseline pressure. Our base cost skyrockets before a single tax is even applied. And crazy enough, these base prices are dynamically recalculated every single morning at 6 a.m. And let's not forget the local logistics. We mentioned dealer commissions earlier. Those add another roughly 3.87 to 4 rupees per liter depending on your region. Running a petrol station isn't free, you know? Dealers have to pay salaries and maintain safe operations. Even geography plays a huge role. Physically trucking fuel into hilly or landlocked regions naturally costs more in freight compared to coastal cities right next to refineries. So it really is a difficult tightrope walk between ensuring consumer affordability and generating vital government revenue, which leaves us with this final, absolutely critical thought to ponder. Every time we pay for a liter of petrol, we aren't just buying fuel, we're essentially funding the very roads we drive on. But as higher fuel costs trickle down into the price of vegetables, groceries, and everything else we buy, policymakers face a delicate balancing act. As our economy grows and our hunger for energy expands, how we choose to tax that energy is going to shape the future of both our wallets and our nation's infrastructure. Keep an eye on those state VAT rates, and until next time, stay curious.